representing people from those areas before, like literally setting an environment or a level in one country and having the language of a different country in it. Like things are that, yeah, like you read the signs and you're like, wait, I just don't get it. Like that's even if you don't go to the negative representation and at that angle, it's not even accurate representation. It's insulting at that level. All these games right now are doing better because there are advocates speaking out. They still fumble. We still get new games that, for example, they have text written in their game where the Arabic font comes from left to right instead of from right to left, so it's illegible. And nobody on the team, I guess, flagged it, and it just releases that way. But that kind of thing might not like means a lot to people in those regions who read it, because it's kind of like disrespectful, right? It's a sign of you don't care enough about us to do the basic minimum to get how our words are written right. So it's not just like it goes both ways. Like don't do the positive thing of representing us, but also don't do the negative thing of representing us poorly, and that's going to help in those regions, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of it's funny and sad. Well, it's more upsetting, I should say, when you're talking about how, like, people are doing these things, creating these experiences and not necessarily like being in line, or definitely, and in some cases, definitely not being in line with just really showcasing what it should be. And you provide some key examples. A kind of funny take on this, though. I doubt anybody will ever watch this or remember it, and I just happen to remember this one scene. It's from Cannibal the Musical. I think it's from the same creators of South Park, but in that there's one scene, and this is clearly deliberate, but it still speaks to the point that you were making. The film takes place, and I think in the Wild West, so to speak, or Gold Rush and things like that. I'm sorry, and the main character comes across this Native American tribe. And he goes, what tribe is this? And he goes, the Nihonjin tribe. And Nihonjin translates to Japanese. And they hired all Japanese actors to play Native Americans because back then that was always a common thing, like misrepresentation type thing, type of stuff. But it was, I don't know why that called attention to that, but it was just really funny. But it was funny in kind of a stark contrast kind of way too, because like these are all things that we've been dealing with, like, growing up, and we're continue to see that in the gaming culture too. But again, it's like going above and beyond as far as like how we're changing things. Like you said earlier, how we're really companies and game creators and everything are really seeing these things and providing a better understanding of that. And when you were talking about Call of Duty and the other games relating to that in terms of providing what that experience, it actually leads into my next question, and wanting to understand like what's real and relatable, right? Because that's really important aspect to what we're talking about here. So like sometimes when game creators are looking to provide realistic settings or relatable themes, even they can sometimes base this information off what appears to be common understanding, right? But how can assuming this potentially provide an unrealistic view, which can possibly have a negative impact on some cultures?
Yes. Okay. So one thing you have to be careful of is that even though there are a lot of topics that are relatable, a lot of times the approaches around those topics are very differently from region to region. I'll give an example from where I grew up. I grew up in Montreal, Canada, and I grew up watching both English television, which is a mixture of Canadian TV, but mostly it's American TV. We're neighbors up north. We get a lot of your TV shows, but also French TV, which is also a mixture of television from France, but mostly local from Quebec, the province where I'm from. So what I noticed is sometimes the same brand would have two ads, one in English and one in French, and the tone of the ads would be completely different. I noticed it at a young age, completely different based on whether it was French or English. One of the examples that stuck with me to this day is ads, and this was across all brands. Everybody understood this. Ads for cold medicine. In English TV, a cold is treated as a serious thing. People are always like in pain. They have like, nasal pain, and you see like there's stark reds that's superimposed on top of the people's nasal passages, and they're holding their heads because of a headache. The tone is very, this is bad and have this medicine. French ads often played funny music. It was lighthearted. It's like, oh, you have a cold. Oh, poor you. Here, take this. It'll make you feel better. That might sound like a small, subtle difference, but it was huge. And it's because how you approach a topic within a culture or within a demographic is going to paint it. If, for example, you had a similar ad than the French ads, but towards an English audience, I would imagine like colds are serious. What are you talking about? It's stopping me from work. It's hindering my life. You can't make fun of colds in this kind of setting. I just won't take your product seriously. While in French, it's like, it's just a cold. There are worse things out there. Both are right. And having a cold is a relatable thing. Like everybody in the world has a cold, but just the tone makes a big difference. So if you go in and you say, well, everyone has colds, we're going to make some like an ad and make it universal across everywhere, you're in for, if you don't do the legwork to see how the expectation from the region, you could be in for a rude awakening when people react one way or another towards it. So like I know it's subtle, but that's important. I could give another example, very, very different example. This also stuck with me from a long time ago. Symbolisms are very important. This is not exactly in advertising, but it strikes home from someone who used to watch a lot of boxing. From when Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman in Zaire, and you're thinking, where is he going with this? The crowd were chanting Muhammad Ali's name. Like basically he did a few things that are really strong lessons. He understood marketing himself better than Muhammad Ali understood marketing himself so well, more than many people do today. He actually visited Zaire early. He landed there early. He spent time with the people to get to know them, to understand their likes and dislikes. And he did one thing, is he represented himself as one of them. And that Foreman is this invading force. They're both American. Muhammad Ali and George Foreman are both American. They're both black. If anything, George Foreman's skin complexion looked closer to the people of Zaire than Muhammad Ali's. Muhammad Ali's is more fair-skinned. They should have had more superficially more reason to root for George Foreman because they were just recently colonized by Belgium not too long ago. But Muhammad Ali presented Foreman just by being there early and speaking to them, seeing that how they reacted to like they still had strong feelings, understandably, for their colonizers. He represented George Foreman as someone who's from the colonizing force, and himself as one of them. And the other thing that George Foreman inadvertently did, which he didn't realize, he walked out of the plane with 2 German shepherds. And German shepherds in Zaire were used by the colonizing force to control the populace. So the people of Zaire had strong negative feelings towards German shepherds specifically, understandably, because they were used to oppress them. And that sealed the deal. Just that. Like, there's nothing wrong with German shepherds as a species of dog. No, having dogs is relatable, man's best friend, all that symbolism, except in that specific area, in that specific context, where George Foreman didn't know beforehand. He didn't show up early, and he didn't scout. He didn't come prepared. He just assumed people were going to be rooting for him, while Muhammad Ali did the legwork. And he got lucky on top of that, of course, because George Foreman kind of sealed the deal with the shepherds, with the German shepherds. But still, so even common understanding, even common shared relatable experiences that we all go through, something as simple as like the tone of your ads or like the symbolism that it carries can turn people against you, or the other way around. If you employ the right symbolism and the right tone, people could really come flocking to you. And I say this, of course, not as a marketing expert. I'm like a user experience expert. I'm a game designer. It's a little bit different, but I've worked with many people who deal with marketing, and I've spoken to a lot of people from around the world, and I've seen many such examples of that. So like, I don't want to misrepresent myself, Andrew. You're the expert of marketing, not me.
Well, I absolutely love that story you shared, and that's actually something I didn't know about Muhammad Ali in that particular fight. But I mean, it goes to show your point, and let's take it back to apply it to some games in this instance here, right? So Muhammad Ali, he went there, and what did he do? He got to know the people. He got to introduce himself, share a little bit more about him and everything. And at the essence, like again, how this relates to games, like, or were they going to help him win the fight? No, it's really, it comes down to between him and George Foreman, right? But there's a relatable, even probably a psychological aspect when you're making those types of connections with people. It like, you know, and even if he lost, like, what did he really achieve in the end, right? There, and that's why we talk about, like, on the show so many times about knowing your audience, and these are great examples that you could apply to what you're doing in terms of creating your game, designing your game. What is that ultimately that player experience about, and being mindful. I forgot who did it, but there was an article a while ago where this game creator, their game was heavily involved with spiders, right? But they're being mindful of people who have arachnophobia. So there's a mode of the game that it basically eliminates all the spiders from the game. Because because they want to be mindful of their audience. They know, like, most people, whether they have arachnophobia or not, that, again, like you were saying, Osama, it's relatable. But some people have a much severe case
reaction.
of exactly compared to others. So again, it's coming down to that concept and understanding of your audience, having the empathy for them and such. Now, another thing that you mentioned in that story, and this is why I like it so much, you mentioned about being authentic, right?
Yes.
And I want to apply this idea of being authentic, back to, like, game creators and devs and stuff, because I feel that sometimes game creators may want to provide a realistic and relatable experience for different cultures, but they may feel that they can't be authentic because they can't relate due to cultural differences, or basically, like, have imposter syndrome, right? So what's a good way devs can realize their vision without worrying about whether or not they're authentic?
Okay, so the number one thing is this is going to depend on the size. I know you work mostly primarily with indies, but even indies, they range in size of company.
Mm-hmm.
If you have someone as part of your workforce who is from that culture, and if they're willing, because that's extra labor that they'd have to sign up to do, if they're willing, without being coerced into it, listen to them. Not just listen to them, but, like, if you're trying to reach out to a target audience that's from the same culture as someone on your team, involve that person from the very beginning of the process. Actually listen to them and make sure that they're comfortable to speak out. Because a lot of times you could say, oh, we had that person in the room, but everyone's talking over them and they don't feel, like, safe to speak and say, well, that thing that you're harping on about, that's a faux pas. But they don't want to be the negative voice in the room. So if nobody stops and makes room for them to speak, a lot of times they just won't speak. And by the way, this is not their responsibility. This is a bonus that if they do accept, this is a bonus that they could that they're doing, and acknowledge it as that. Be thankful for it. It's not because that's extra labor that they have to do, and it's tiring, and it's in addition to their other job. They're not going to take a break from the other job, so you can't expect anybody from a background to want to be the representative for that background. So that's not it. But I'm just saying, make room for them. That's your first stop. If you don't have that, if your team is small, or you just don't have people from the target audience that you want to represent, you have to hire a consultant. There are no shortcuts to this. You're not going to be able to, even like in the example of Muhammad Ali that I used, where he went to Zaire and he spent time with them. That is not going to make him an expert.
Right.
That's not going to make anyone expert. Even if you're like, you know what, I spent a year in let's say even Italy, and I'm going to make a game based in Italy. I spent a year there. I'm an expert now. That you're going to get subtle things wrong. You just will, because you're not going to be able to absorb a lifetime of experiences in that short time. So the shortcut around this is to hire a consultant, and I use the word hire loosely. Depending on the size of your indie team, you might not have the budget for it or not, but at least reach out and see if anyone's willing to consult with you. If you can afford it, definitely pay for it because that's labor. But if you can't afford it, don't just shy away and say, well, whatever, I'll wing it. See if you could at least find some volunteers on the internet. If you're like a one-person indie dev team working out of your basement, I'm sure you can find people on the internet who are willing to answer some questions for you and to consult with you on a level. I've consulted without being paid because I'm not a consultant in that sense, but I've consulted for many indie games in the past where people are just like, hey, can we show you this or can you read through this?